Hi, my name is DM Barr, and I am the author of such psychological suspense novels as Expired Listings, Slashing Mona Lisa, and the upcoming domestic thriller, Saving Grace. In this installment of Author Groupie, I am honored to speak with one of my favorite authors, Brad Parks. Brad has won so many awards, they're actually out creating new ones for him to win. Not only is he going to discuss his new book, Interference, which is coming out at the beginning of September, but he's going to share tips on how to make characters likable, to what he attributes his great success, and how he deals with stalkers like me. So sit back, enjoy, and as always, stay safe. Welcome everybody to a new issue or a new edition of Author Groupie. I'm here with one of my very favorite authors, Brad Parks, who did tell me, and I have it in print, that I could stalk him anytime. So this is me stalking him. I'm going to read his bio.
You can stalk me through a pandemic if you want to, Dawn. Like that proves it, right?
Yes, thank you. I can get to you any way I can. I'm going to read a short bio, and then we're going to get to the interrogation.
Excellent.
International best-selling author Brad Parks is the only writer to have won the Seamus, the Nero, and the Lefty Awards, 3 of American crime fiction's most prestigious prizes. His novels have been translated into 15 languages and have won critical acclaim across the globe, including stars from every major pre-publication review outlet. A graduate of Dartmouth College, Parks is a former journalist with the Washington Post and the Star-Ledger in New Jersey, and he is now a full-time novelist living in Virginia with his wife and his 2 school-age children, who apparently know Zoom very well, he's told me. His last novel, this last act, which I'm in the middle of reading, was released in March of 2019, and his next release, Interference, will be out September 1st, and is a techno thriller. I get everything right? Good.
Yeah, you nailed it. Perfect.
Great. That's in my best.
This is the good thing about having your stalkers. Like when your stalkers do your work for you, they have high attention to detail. Stalkers are useful people to have around.
Thank you. Tell my husband that I'm useful. So a techno thriller is a change from writing about journalism, domestic suspense, and the other thriller subgenres that you've tackled. Tell us a little bit about the upcoming book and what inspired you to venture into writing about science and technology.
So Dawn, this probably won't shock you, but I've always been a nerd. And so I've kind of had in my head for a long time that someday I would write a book with science in it, because I love science. I love the history of science. I've always been this physics geek. I'm fascinated by the ideas of science and by the philosophy of science, even if I cannot do the actual science. So yeah, before we scare anybody off, let us be very, very clear. This is science written by a social scientist. So it's all very approachable. But I've long been fascinated by quantum physics. It is, this baffling, incredibly small world where none of the rules of what we would call logic apply, right? So I'd kind of been wanting for a number of years to do a novel that used this weird stuff. And I think for a long time I was trying to find a way to fit my novel to the physics. And then finally I had this brainstorm, no, I'll fit the physics to my novel. And but the basic premise is, can you use quantum physics to find a missing person? So it sort of melds that classic mystery. I mean, it's, ultimately somebody being kidnapped and we're trying to find them, with these kind of newer, more fun elements. And I think if there's a theme, though, that kind of runs through all my work, and this is whether it's I've done some legal thrillers. Yeah, this is kind of like a sciencey thriller. My Carter Ross series was an investigative newspaper reporter, would be considered more of a procedural. But the theme is like, it's ordinary people. All of my protagonists and all of the supporting characters would all be people you could bump into in the grocery store. They are not necessarily, they may have some specialties, whether it's in the law or something else, but they can't break your jaw by looking at it. They can't defuse the bomb. They are, to me, just very ordinary, approachable people who have these incredible things happen to them and then have to work their way out of whatever the problem is. So if there's a theme to my work, and yeah, Interference is my 10th novel, which kind of blows me away. But that would be it. Ordinary people thrown into extraordinary circumstances.
So what I read about from the preview is that it's a man who suddenly becomes ill with a mysterious illness.
Right.
And so I'm kind of curious if the current anti-science political vibe inspired you at all to write it now.
Well, so, of course, I wrote this all before coronavirus. When, it's interesting, we didn't quite see the full cost of an anti-science mindset.
Yeah.
Versus, we're not to date this recording, but we just crossed 100,000 deaths here in the United States of America from coronavirus, and what percentage of those were due to basic scientific illiteracy? That's probably too complex a question to ask.
Yeah.
But certainly, I think look, hey, this is still a thriller, and I never want to veer into something that is a polemic, right? Where I'm standing up on the soapbox and lecturing at you.
Sure.
But certainly one of those unstated goals of the book is to make science approachable and to make science relatable and to make science exciting. One of the fun things I did with this, I happen to have a college buddy who is now a professor of physics and the history of physics at MIT.
Okay.
His name is Dave Kaiser. He's actually written a few books of his own. And being able to bounce this back and forth with Dave and say, okay, could this happen? Is this possible? That kind of thing. And being able to ground it in like real, actual science.
Yeah.
That was tremendously fun. And hopefully it's gratifying for the reader to know that, like, yeah, I'm always going to, have that little extra twist of fiction somewhere in there, but that the vast majority of this is stuff that's real, that you can look up if you want to, and you'll find it on Google. I'm not making it up. And like, you're always playing with that. Okay, so what's the not real part? But yeah, I certainly, I love the science. I love the nature of inquiry, which is, I think, something that any mystery reader is going to naturally be drawn to, that wanting to know. And I think that's what draws a lot of scientists into what they do. Science is one big mystery. So to be able to kind of find the common themes of, my genre and my passion with this new area was part of what just made the book a lot of fun for me to write.
It sounds really fun. I'm going to go back. It's very hard to find questions that you haven't been asked, I got to tell you, because there are so many interviews about you out there. But looking back, you were a sports writer that transitioned into news writing. Is that unusual? And is there anything from sports writing you brought with you that made you a better news writer?
I think sports writing is ultimately just storytelling. Isn't that the old joke? It's a little bit sexist, but like, sports is basically soap opera for guys. Of course, we know that women are sports fans too, so that's why that joke falls apart completely. But really, when you seriously look at sports, and if you took away the sweaty people exerting themselves at a very high heart rate, the storylines of sports and the storylines of pick any other genre of storytelling are very similar. I mean, it's right now in the NFL, we have Tom Brady, who has jilted his longtime lover, the New England Patriots, and is off with the beautiful new Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah.
How is that not soap opera, right? So I think being a sports writer, and especially I was a sports writer in the relatively modern era of sports, which is from the earliest days of my career. I knew that everybody already knew the final score of the game I was writing about. So my job every day when I went to the stadium was find the story behind the score. So that instinct of find a story, tell a story, find a story, tell a story, and then learning what are the aspects of story, what are the mechanics that make a story good, right? That became kind of such a reflex, and that I have been able to then translate into news writing and into mystery writing. I'll always remember finding my first Mary Higgins Clark book. And I was, in an airport traveling from one sporting event to another, and I just kind of grabbed it, and and of course was immediately transfixed, and later got the real honor of being able to meet Mary and get to know her about yay much. But like,
yeah,
learning at that, I was a young man still trying to learn everything I could. It's like learning that the basic Mary Higgins Clark of like, I don't know whether this young woman I'm suddenly attached to is going to be killed by the serial killer or not. Like, that's great storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And being able to take Mary Higgins Clark and put it into sports writing was something that I did for a lot of years, actually. And then so you just find and forgive me if I'm rambling, but
no, it's fine.
The lessons of what works, what human beings really get off on and get into about a story. It doesn't matter whether you're writing about sports or whether you're writing about crime or politics or you name it. It's the same basic stuff.
So you kind of half answered my next question. Was
sorry.
Interviewed this. Don't worry about it. I interviewed this female PI who's a true crime writer, and she made the move, or she wants to move to fiction because she finds so many true crimes end up as cold cases, and she found that frustrating. Right. So is that one of the reasons you moved to fiction, or was it just easier to make characters do what you wanted them to do? From news writing to fiction?
Yeah, I kind of identify with what your PI was talking about. I mean, my first novel, Faces of the Gone, was nothing more and nothing less than this. I was a journalist. I was working in Newark. I was covering a quadruple homicide. It was 4 people left for dead in the back of a vacant lot in Newark, New Jersey. And I was just coming off the sports beat, where I had the luxury of being able to tell a full story every time I went out, because you got the final score, you got the stats, you got to interview the hero, you interview the GOAT. It's this beautiful narrative arc every single time. And then now here suddenly I'm in a vacant lot. I'm literally looking at the place in the soil where these people bled to death. And we have the beginning of this story, but we don't have the middle, and we certainly don't have the end. Right. And as time went along, the crime was not solved. And for me, the storyteller, that was deeply unsatisfying. So I sat down one day, a couple of months later, and started asking myself what really happened in that vacant lot. And the answer turned out to be my first novel, Faces of the Gone.
Which is a great idea for looking at cold cases and then writing the ending yourself.
Right. Oh, and everything, like the takeoff, 4 people shot in the back of the head and left in a vacant lot in Newark. That is the only thing that ultimately bears any resemblance to reality whatsoever. But even just that kernel is enough to get you going, because as mystery authors know, like often that question, what happened here, that's all you need to do to be able to take off and start running with a story.
So did you sell your first book, or did you have books sitting in your desk drawer?
Dawn, okay, I'm not that much of a savant. Okay, there's a novel sitting in the drawer that would probably remain in the drawer for a long time, even though I'm very, very fond of it. And I think more than anything too, like I had been writing a lot. I started covering sports when I was 14 years old. So I'm definitely a big believer in the Malcolm Gladwell, 10 years, 10,000 hours. Some people with writing say 1 million words. I did all that. I just did it at a very young age. And I did it in newspapers that thankfully are not online in any way, shape, or form. So you can't find my truly horrific early writings for the most part. So they are lost to history. Maybe they exist on microfilm somewhere. I've got them somewhere up in the attic, wrapped in plastic. I will never let them out. But that's kind of where I really developed my chops as a writer, essentially, such that when I finally started to write fiction, a lot of the kind of mechanical stuff that is a real struggle for early writers, I had already worked out in another way. My challenge was then learn how to write a novel. And that's frankly something I've still been learning and still been working on. This is not, as I think all of your viewers and you yourself are aware, this is not an instantly perfectible craft, no. Right? It is one that we are all working to get better at, and it is very difficult, and it makes my head explode sometimes. It makes everyone's head explode, but like learning kind of the little tricks and the little, and I think we're getting better at it too. That's I think another one of the exciting things about what we do is coming from the sports world. The athlete reaches their physical peak, depending on the person, anywhere from with women, with female athletes in some sports, it's like 16. That's it. 18, 19. With males, maybe 24, 25. They can hang on until they're 27. Sometimes they can play in their 30s, but like the decline is very clear to all, versus with us, I think a lot of writers don't hit their stride until their 50s, their 60s. And we can still really keep improving our craft until, we finally start losing our marbles in however long our brains are meant to last. Right. But, and I think, when you think about the authors we all love and we all read, many of them are well into their 70s. I mean, Mary Higgins Clark, I'll bring her up again. We're still writing great books, by the age of 90, which is incredible. But it's a fun part of what we do about, you're always seeking the next great novel, and you're always hoping that your best work is still in front of you. And I love that aspect about what we do.
I agree. It's very hopeful to me because I'm still learning. I'm on with my fourth book, and I know they can get better.
But I always say, like, are you dead yet? No, then you can still learn. Like, that's the great thing about our craft.
Absolutely. So exposure, especially for a new author, is so hard. Yet your first book, Faces of the Gone, sold out its first run in 9 days. To what do you attribute that almost instant popularity?
My incredible good looks, Dawn. What else? Either my incredible good looks or my incredibly small print may have had something to do with it. But, I think I really actually attribute it to the mystery community. Which is this great, wonderful group of people that I've gotten to know so well and love so much. And they are so incredibly supportive of new authors. And I think, because, a real good mystery groupie, a mystery aficionado is always looking for that next big thing, right? And so when there does get to be that little buzz about like, ooh, did you read this? Did you read this? Even though I was absolutely no one at all. Nobody had ever heard of me. I was nothing, right? Somehow that book got some buzz about it, and the next thing you know, it's gone from the shelves. So, and I don't know. I've just been very heartened and gratified by the constant support from people in the mystery community that have followed me ever since. I would clearly not be doing this were it not for them, frankly, because there's no way I could have lasted this long without that support. Because there is the very real aspect of this of, if I don't sell books, they'll find someone else who will. And by the way, I'm not independently wealthy, even though, I certainly had a comfortable upbringing. I did not have a trust fund, anything like that. So if I couldn't make a living doing this, you did mention that family of mine, I'd have to do something else. So, going back to the first novel, I think a first novel can always catch lightning in a jar a little bit because people are looking for that next big thing. But what's really heartened me is knowing that there are people who bought that first novel who are still buying my novels now. And that's what keeps me going, really.
Well, I actually fell in love with Carter Ross on the first page of that book. And then I read all the rest of them. I loved him.
I love Carter too.
So Yahoo.com called you the love child of Janet Ivanovich and Harlan Coben.
Right. So unfortunately, Mom and Dad don't ever let me borrow the keys to the car. So I've still got a Ford parked outside as a result.
Well, were your actual parents funny, or did they inspire your sense of humor? And if not, who did or what did?
Yeah, my dad is, I think he's like the secret of my parents' marriage, and God bless them. They are still together after 52 years, is that Dad has this inexhaustible memory of jokes, and Mom can't remember a joke 3 weeks he told it to her. So like, I'd always keep on laughing with a joke he had probably told her 5 years ago, but she had completely forgotten it. I think, if you ever met my dad and looked at me, you go, Oh yeah, I get it. Because I always say, he's a good-looking guy. He got it from me. But no, my dad was a funny guy. Was a great storyteller. Interesting though, my mom was and is to a certain extent an artist. So I think, and by the way, she was an artist with 2 kids to raise. So I really got to see up close how an artist approached her craft and also an ordinary life, right? And so, mom was like the queen of, she was doing an MFA program when I was, a really little kid. And she would always talk about how, like, her classmates in the NFA program would say, well, I couldn't paint today because I wasn't inspired, and my mother had to get inspired during those few hours when she had childcare. Like, that's when she was going to be inspired. And I kind of take that same sensibility into my writing. Like, okay, it's 6 o'clock in the morning and I'm up and I got 1,000 words to write today. So I am damn well going to be inspired. So I've been blessed to have 2 wonderful, supportive parents, and they've each kind of made their contributions into this crazy guy right here.
So speaking of Carter Ross, as we were before, that whole series was really, it got acclaim for its humor. And then you moved from that to more serious works. And I know other authors have done that too. And I've always asked them, because my novels involve humor and it's harder to sell. Or at least they told me they don't write them anymore because they were hard to sell. That didn't seem to affect you. But why the change? Did you sense that it might be a risk, or did you feel that your loyal readers would follow you anywhere, even without the humor?
I think it was a combination of things. I mean, certainly I won't ignore the sales aspect of it. I think publishing often doesn't know what to do with a novel that's a little bit funny, but also pretty darn serious. I wrote a book called The Good Cop. It was my 4th novel, that both, it won the Lefty Award for Best Humorous Mystery, but also won the Seamus Award for the Best PI Novel, which is a very unusual combination. And when you look at the cover of that novel, the guy on the cover looks like a Nazi, right? So it's like, is this a funny novel, a serious novel? So I think I wanted to make it a little less difficult on the marketing people at my publishing company.
Yeah.
But then I think also some of that was me. When I started writing Carter Ross, I was 30 years old. I was not married. I was with the woman who is now my wife. So I wasn't quite the footloose and fancy-free bachelor Carter is, but still, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. Life wasn't serious back then, frankly. And now 15 years later, here I am, married, 2 kids, and the things that happen out there, they don't just affect me. They affect my family. They affect my children. And when those are the stakes, life just starts looking a little more serious to you, and maybe you don't feel like cracking wise as much when you sit down to the keyboard. So I think it was a combination of things. In the last act, I kind of maybe let that funny voice come out a little bit more. But it's also a question of what's going on in the novel. I think it was easier and it was more organic for Carter Ross to be funny sometimes, because early on when a newspaper reporter is investigating a story, he doesn't necessarily know what's happening yet. And so the bodies maybe they don't mean as much to you. And so it's easier to kind of be flippant about it. And then later on in the story, you get that emotional investment and fine. And then I just found my standalones. I mean, my first standalone, Say Nothing, which you just held up, was about a federal judge whose children are kidnapped. And the kidnapping happens on like page 3. The rest of that novel, he is not going to be in much of a mood to be cracking jokes.
Yeah.
And the seriousness of the tone of that novel, it has to be relentless, and it has to be every page you just feel like you can't breathe, because every day of this novel is like the worst day of this guy's life. So I think it was something of a natural evolution away from some of the funnier stuff that, at least to me, feels like it was meant to happen. And hopefully, I've been fortunate. I definitely still hear from readers who have one question and one question only for me: when is Carter Ross going to come back? And I totally respect that, and I do hope to write Carter again someday. But for the most part, I've been fortunate that people have been willing to follow me down this more serious path that I'm on.
Well, I did have a question about Carter Ross. And that was, is this kid going to end up as much of a smartass as he is?
I don't know. We haven't really gotten to meet her yet, of course. So so we'll find out. I gotta think if she's got Carter's DNA, and she's growing up in New Jersey. Sarcasm is the official language of New Jersey. So I think she's going to have a little bit of that in her for sure.
Good. That could be a little bit of having to deal with it handed back to her. Handing it back to him would be
right. Exactly. Poor Carter when she becomes a teenager. Look out.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, and I tracked you down at Thriller Fest, and then I was so overwhelmed with the crowds that I didn't buy you the drink I promised you, so I do owe you a drink. How does any writer make a character as likable as you made Carter Ross? Because he's instantly likable, even though he's pretty glib. He's just instantly likable, and I find it very hard to make characters as likable as you have.
I think it's really voice is what it is with probably any character. And this, if we're gonna, I know some of your listeners here are going to be writers, so let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit. I actually originally wrote the first entire chapter of the first Carter Ross novel in third person, and I got to the end and I was like, okay, well that's interesting enough. And then I went back and rewrote it in first person, and as soon as I did, it was like bang. There was this voice. There was Carter Ross. He just kind of came alive on the page. And at that point, I was just kind of following him the rest of the way. And I think, for when that voice resonates with you, when you like that voice, the character is going to be likable. And I think, first person also makes it a little bit easier because any person who can explain to you what they're thinking and what they're feeling, that you're going to tend to like that. And I think also, I always try to give characters a core to them, even if I never state it, a what makes them tick, like what matters to them most in the world, what are the things that really drive them. And I think with Carter, he tells you a lot what they are. For Carter, it's the pursuit of truth, right? And it's telling stories that matter, and it's impacting people with those stories. And so maybe it just so happens that those were some of the same things that drove me as a reporter. So I think I was able to write those things in a very authentic way. And then with subsequent characters, I always kind of ask myself that question. All right, what is at this person's core? What is driving them? And I think when you represent those things authentically on the page, it is inevitably going to make the character likable. And then maybe to give a third answer to the question, I don't like non-likable characters in books either. For the most part, if I pick up a book and I don't like the character, I'm going to end up putting the book down because I just don't care, right? I'm not going to spend 360 pages with a character I don't like, or not that I have to like him in the sense of like, hey, I'd love to sidle up next to them and have drinks with them at a cocktail party, but I have to identify with them pretty strongly, right? And if I can't do that, the book goes away.
Yeah. Well, you described yourself in print and actually earlier today as an upper-class white kid, yet your protagonists are not. And you're also an outspoken, anybody who reads you on Facebook knows you're an outspoken proponent of diversity. How do you put yourself in the shoes of others with other life experiences? For example, your new character in the last act is short.
Right.
Or not.
Well, so there's always, and I'm 6'1", not that you can tell on the Zoom. I think there's always an aspect of a character that I personally can dive into. With Tommy Jump, the protagonist, the last act, he's a performer. And that's something that I've had a sideline doing for a long, long time. I sang all through high school. I sang all through college. I still do community theater. I love being on the stage. And so that was the part of Tommy Jump that I could really inhabit. And then the other stuff is kind of window dressing. Can you imagine what it's like to be short? Yeah, sure. Why not?
But you've written about people that are in other races and
right.
Very strong on all the diversity. So I just wanted to touch on that.
What
you write about.
And I think the first time that really became something I thought about a lot was in my 8th novel, Closer Than You Know. I wrote a female protagonist for the first time. And by the way, from the first person. And I was pretty intimidated by that before I started because I didn't want to do it wrong, right?
Yeah.
And even though, I mean, my best friends in life have always been women. I'm married to my best friend now. Mom is a very strong figure. So like I felt like I kind of understand women. I've just talked with women a lot, but still I was intimidated. But then as soon as I started writing, what I realized is that in any given scene I was writing, her gender was about the ninth most important thing that was motivating her. It was really like, what is she up against in this scene? What are the obstacles she has to overcome? What are her goals? What is stopping her? What is helping her? What resources does she bring to bear? What part of her past is going to be coming back at her because of this? Kind of on down the list. And then, oh, by the way, she's a woman. And actually, so like the one thing I did in that novel was I'm like, okay, I'm writing a female protagonist for the first time. And by the way, she was a nursing mother. And I was a stay-at-home dad for a while, so I certainly am aware of the demands of babies and whatnot. And I would bundle our daughter up and take her up to my wife to be breastfed several times a day. So I'm kind of like aware of it. So I had the character. There was a lot of references to, hey, every 4 hours, you need to relieve this pressure and, all this kind of stuff. And so she didn't have the baby for a while, so she was pumping and everything like that. And so the first person to read it was my agent, a mother of two people, of two children. And she said, I really like the novel, but there are too many references to breastfeeding. Can you cut some out? So I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. And the next person to read it was my editor, also a mother of two children. And she reads it and she says, yeah, I really like this, but a little too much breastfeeding. Could you cut that down a bit? And then it was the publisher of the house, actually, another woman who read it. And again, her one comment was, could we have fewer references to breastfeeding, please? So, here I was trying to be this sensitive man who understood women. And like the one area in which I was pandering to women, ended up being almost cut out entirely. So I don't know, maybe the moral of the story is like, you tell the story, you try to be true to the character. You never want to delve into cliches, obviously.
Yeah.
But people will fall into the story and kind of forget about the other stuff for the most part. And that ultimately what everybody is there for is story. Now that said, I've certainly, I think it's also important to know your limitations and to know what you can't do. I mean, one of the things that helped me write Carter Ross, this, upper middle class white guy who goes into some really tough neighborhoods in Newark, is that's what I did for years. And one of the things I'm proud about that series is I have yet to hear from a single person from Newark who said, you got Newark wrong. It's like, because I lived that place for a decade. I was in and out of it every single day. I walked the streets a lot. I talked to the people a lot. I know Newark better than I know any other city I've ever been in because I had to be a reporter there. I had to tell stories from there. And I think that allowed me to write it with a verisimilitude that came across as being very real and not foreign. I think that's you can't have the feeling as a reader that your author is not writing this thing with authority, right? Right. And where does that authority comes from? It comes from being there. It comes from knowing. It comes from kind of understanding the people. And once you have that, once you kind of understand that world, I think you have some latitude to do stuff. Yes, obviously I have characters who are Black and female. I have characters who are Hispanic. I have characters who are all sorts of different things than the boring white guy that I am. But, I'm putting them in that. First of all, they are unique individuals. And anytime you start dealing with unique individuals, those, it melts stereotypes immediately, right? Yeah. And then you put them in this world that you understand very well and have them interacting in that world. And I don't know, hopefully it works, right? At least I haven't gotten any complaints so far.
Definitely works.
But I'm sensitive to that, and I think we all have to be more and more sensitive to it. I actually got a 1-star review on Amazon the other day that stuck with me, and it was based on my first novel, which again I wrote 15 years ago. And I think we had very different sensitivities about certain things 15 years ago. And in this case, it was some of the labels I used for characters, right? I guess I described some kid as a poor Black kid, right? Which is not, inaccurate. It's not especially offensive. But it's not a way I describe a kid now, right? Right. And I think we've all learned over the years the importance of words and the power of words, and how we need to choose those words a little more carefully. So I wouldn't use the phrase "poor black kid" anymore. But that's, that's the nature of fiction that lives out there for a long time. I think at a certain point in time, hopefully it becomes a snapshot of the world in which it was living, and therefore is graded a little differently. And maybe because I'm still fairly young, I'm not getting that the benefit of that
No,
now.
I know what you mean. I mean, when I read Gone with the Wind very recently,
Oh, sure.
I was shocked at how racist that book was.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it blows your, and like even like the books you enjoyed, 30 years ago or something like that, and you pick them up again and you go, oh God. I mean, like I'm a huge John D. MacDonald fan, Travis McGee, right?
Yeah.
And like there are aspects of John D. MacDonald that have aged so well. I mean, with the insights he has about development in Florida, about the environment, things like that. He absolutely nailed it. Travis's thoughts about women have not aged that well, right? And it can be kind of jarring at times.
Yeah. Well, completely different topic.
Sure.
You were named one of crime fiction sexiest, I can't speak, sexiest authors of 2011. Now, I know when I won an award, I went to my husband and I said, God, you're so lucky to be married to me. What's it like to be married to me? All in jest. Humor is sexy. So were you able to milk that award at home?
Man, if only I could have, right? I think of all people, my wife is not fooled. So yeah, I don't think, Dawn, that line ever worked. Hey, honey, you want to get with one of crime fiction's sexiest authors? The problem being, being one of crime fiction's sexiest authors is a little bit like being the highest ski slope in Florida. Right, we are not people for the most part who are making money based on our looks. So it's and actually the person who named that, Jen Forbes, who was a wonderful blogger and a good member of the community and everything like that, she did explain what she meant by sexy, and it was not quite the same definition as, say, what People magazine used. Right, she was of course looking more at the soul of the person, and so some of the sexiest authors would definitely not have qualified for a modeling contract the next day, for sure. And I include myself as being one of those people.
I think humor is sexy, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I've got another question.
I'll go with that. I like that, Dawn.
Coming toward the end, because I know you have to run soon. But because of your presence at conferences and on social media, you are definitely one of the most accessible writers I know. To what degree do you think that's played into your success? And do you have other stalkers other than me?
Dawn, I'm collecting as many stalkers as I can get. As a matter of fact, if any of you out there would like to apply to be one of my stalkers, as Dawn knows, I have only a few criteria. One of them is when I'm about to have a book coming out, you have to violate your restraining order, such that way I can make the complaint and there can be a story in the paper and everything like that, because that ends up being good publicity for a crime fiction author. Let's face it.
That's it.
But no, I don't know. Like it's, I've kind of learned, Dawn, that like almost everybody in this business, other than James Patterson, is looking up at somebody else's success, right? And kind of looking at like, oh, if only I could be like that, then I would be really. And on my bad days, I probably still do that. On my good days, I just try to be happy with what I have. Right. And I know
who are you looking at on your bad days? Who are you trying?
Oh, Jesus. I mean, who wouldn't want to be Harlan Coben? Who wouldn't want to be Janet Evanovich? Who wouldn't, my book sales are probably, a rounding error compared to those people. I'm happy to make a living, and that's great. And that's what I do. But, we all wish we could sell more books. But I guess, like I said, on my good days, I say, I try to write the best story I can. I try to make every book better than the last. And I try to write stories that I think people will be interested in. And I put that out in the universe and I see what's going to happen. And otherwise, you try not to get too wrapped up in that comparison. I'll never forget the author who, I won't name him, but he was at a conference. He was the guest of honor, all this kind of stuff. And afterwards in the bar, as you do, I went up to him and I was talking about the interview he had given on stage and about, how much it resonated with me and just how wise I felt it was and everything like that. And he says, yeah, well, and mind you, he was a little liquored up and I was too at this point. He says, you know what ticks me off? I write legal thrillers and John Grisham writes legal thrillers. And he's always number 1 on the list and I've never been higher than 4. And you're like, at that moment, you say to yourself, please, dear God, never let this be me. And so far, at least, I've tried to stick with that, even though, let's be clear, I've never made it to 4 on the New York Times bestseller list. So
I find that, I am surprised that that's true.
I'm young, Dawn, give me some time.
Well, you're well known for writing at Hardee's. Where have you been writing since the pandemic closed down restaurants, and how has it affected your writing? And the last part of that question, and probably I think the best part, is how do you write in the present now when it feels like everything that preceded COVID-19 is historical?
All right, so yeah, that's multiple questions. The Hardee's thing is difficult. Let's face it. Yes, I write all my novels at Hardee's. I have for a long time, and the reason I keep doing it is because it works for me, right? And isn't that the first rule of being a writer? You find something that works for you, you keep doing it, no matter what it is. So it's been difficult. I now write in the same place where I'm Zooming with you, which is my bedroom. Somehow that became the one room in the house that I could control and I could keep people out of for the most part. We all have our different rooms out there in the house, and somehow the bedroom became it. But the one problem is that is like, okay, so I write in the bedroom in the morning, and then I have some, do some exercise, have some lunch, and then I go back into the bedroom to, maybe do some editing, do some other promotional stuff, whatever. And then I come out and I have dinner for the family and everything like that. And then we put the kids to bed eventually, and my wife and I go back in the bedroom and maybe watch a program or read or whatever. And then I go to sleep in the bedroom, and I'm realizing I'm spending about 16 hours a day in my goddamn bedroom, and it's a little bit crazy. So I might be going crazy. You, as my stalker, might end up looking like the very sane one by the time this is all over. And every time I have a really difficult day or moment, I'm like, honey, I'm talking to my wife. I just don't know how hard. Why is this so hard? She says, honey, you're an extrovert in the middle of a pandemic. Cut yourself some slack. It's like, okay, yeah. But then, in terms of the pandemic itself, frankly, I've kind of participated in and read some fascinating feeds about this online, about how all of us are actually a little bit leery of using this in any way, because, of course, we're all writing for the soonest this book is going to come out is a year from now, maybe a year and a half from now, and we have no idea what the world is going to look like then. And it's a little scary to write a book whose premise is one news cycle away from being destroyed, right? So, and I think there was an interesting corollary. Apparently the 1918 Spanish influenza outbreak, there were very, very few references to it in contemporary literature. And I understand why. And it's because of that time cycle we're on of, you don't know the book you're writing in 1918 that's going to come out in 1920, what the world is going to look like. So I think a very similar thing is going to happen with coronavirus. I don't think you're going to see coronavirus in a lot of stories until 5 years from now, until 10 years from now. Like 10 years from now, there is going to be a Pulitzer Prize winning novel about the coronavirus times, absolutely no question. But until that point, and until we kind of get it significantly in our rear view mirror, I think no one's going to touch it for a good while yet.
All right, 2 more questions.
Sure.
And then you're free.
All right.
What are the 2 books you wish you'd written, and why?
Well, one is definitely Quotations by Chairman Mao, because it has sold more than 1 billion copies. And because there was a point in time where in China, if you did not have a copy of Quotation from Chairman Mao, like on your person, you could be executed.
Oh, wow.
So, just once, I would like to see that kind of royalty statement, right? Like 1 billion copies. Like I would just love that. So so definitely. And so, and then you have to ask me, what would the second one be? I don't know. I hopefully I haven't written it yet. Hopefully it's something I'll write. one of these days. I mean, I think that's unless you're a hack, the thing that drives you in this business is thinking to yourself, yeah, my next book is going to be my best book, and my best book hasn't been written yet. And so I'm still kind of chasing that ideal. And I've heard a lot of, like, I can remember hearing Michael Connelly talk about that. And, talk about a guy who has accomplished anything you would ever want to accomplish in this world. He's won every single award, everything like that. And talking about it, at a certain point, it becomes about the aesthetic, right? Can I write the novel that was even more beautiful than the last one I wrote? Okay, now what was your other question?
My last question
All right.
is, and it's the laziest question any interviewer can ask. Tell me 3 things nobody knows about you that everyone would be surprised about. And that's hard for you because you're so out there.
I was about to say, I've been at this for like 10 years now, Dawn. Everybody knows everything. I got no secrets left. Okay. I am really good at catching grapes in my mouth.
Okay.
Like I can throw up grapes and catch them in my mouth. When I was a little boy, I had such a large imaginary world. I used to play football against myself. And this would include both throwing the ball to myself and catching it, and also tackling myself. So that was certainly something. And let's see here. Finally, I really love to break into song. Nobody knows that about me, Dawn.
Nobody knows that. Are you going to sing for us?
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I've heard of once in a lullaby.
Beautiful. Very nice. Thank you for singing for me. And thanks
for having me, Dawn.
I know I've kept you for like 45 minutes, and I know how precious your time is. So I want to thank you so much for spending time with me.
It is my pleasure.
And not alerting not alerting the authorities about me breaking the restraining order.
Well, just remember, come September 1st, Interference comes out, and I expect you to be camped out on my doorstep, Dawn. We've got books to sell. Let's go.
It's absolutely. I've already pre-ordered, and I hope everybody else out there buy all of Brad Park's books. They are fabulous. And thank you again.
Over the river to the city far from home. Toll booth takes my mind.